Chapter 6 Belgium under German occupation. Germany's onrush into heroic Belgium was accompanied by the deeds that shocked the civilized world. The moment the Belgian frontiers were crossed, the German army put into practice a system of terrorism in its dealings with the inhabitants, hoping in this way to frighten the government, demoralize the army, and break the national resistance. Stories of atrocities began to be heard. Some of these were undoubtedly exaggerated, but others could not be denied. What caused these atrocities? Were they the spontaneous expression of dormant brutishness in German soldiers? Were they a sudden reversion of an entire nation to bestiality? The answer is that the private soldier as an individual was not responsible. The carnage, the rapine, the wholesale desolation was an integral part of the German policy of Schrecklichkeit, or frightfulness. This policy was laid down by Germany as part of its imperial war code. In 1902, Germany issued a new war manual entitled Kreisbrauch in Landkrieg. In it is written this cold-blooded declaration: all measures which conduce to the attainment of the object of war are permissible, and these may be summarized in the two ideas of violence and cunning. What is permissible includes every means of war without which the object of the war cannot be attained, all means which modern invention affords, including the fullest, most dangerous, and most massive means of destruction may be utilized. Brand Whitlock, United States Minister to Belgium, in a formal report to the State Department, made this statement concerning Germany's policy in permitting these outrages. All these deliberate organized massacres of civilians, all these murders and outrages, the violation of women, the killing of children, wanton destruction, burning, looting, and pillage, and whole towns destroyed, were acts for which no possible military necessity can be pleaded. They were willfully committed as part of a deliberately prepared and scientifically organized policy of terrorism. And now, having considered these outrages as part of the German policy of terrorism, let us turn to the facts presented by those who made investigations at first hand in devastated Belgium and northern France. Let us first turn to the tragic story of the destruction of Louvain. The first document comes in the form of a cable sent from the Belgian Minister of Foreign Affairs, under date of August 8, 1914. On Tuesday evening, a body of German troops who had been driven back retired in disorder upon the town of Louvain. Germans who were guarding the town thought that the retiring troops were Belgians and fired upon them. In order to excuse this mistake by the Germans, in spite of the most energetic denials on the part of the authorities, pretended that Belgians had fired on the Germans, although all the inhabitants, including policemen, had been disarmed for more than a week. Without any examination and without listening to any protest, the commanding officer announced that the town would be immediately destroyed. All inhabitants had to leave their homes at once. Some were made prisoners. Women and children were put into a train of which the destination was unknown. Soldiers with firebombs set fire to the different quarters of the town. The splendid church of St. Pierre, the markets, the university, and its scientific establishments were given to the flames, and it is probable that the Hôtel de Ville, this celebrated jewel of Gothic art, will also have disappeared in the disaster. Several notabilities were shot at sight. Thus a town of 40,000 inhabitants, which since the 15th century has been the intellectual and scientific capital of the Low Countries, is a heap of ashes. Americans, many of whom have followed the course at this illustrious alma mater and have there received such cordial hospitality, cannot remain insensible to this outrage on the rights of humanity and civilization which is unprecedented in history. Minister Whitlock made the following report on the same outrage. A violent fusillade broke out simultaneously at various points in the city, Louvain, notably at the Portes de Bruxelles, Porte de Tirlemont, Rue Leopold, Rue Marie-Therese, Rue des Joyeuses Entrées. German soldiers were firing at random in every street and in every direction. Later fires broke out everywhere, notably in the university building, the library, in the old church of St. Peter, in the Place des Peuples, in the Rue de la Station, in the Boulevard de Tirlemont, and in the Chaise de Tirlemont. On the orders of their chiefs, the German soldiers would break open the houses and set fire to them, shooting on the inhabitants who tried to leave their dwellings. Many persons who took refuge in their cellars were burned to death. The German soldiers were equipped with apparatuses for the purpose of firing dwellings, incendiary pastilles, machines for spraying petroleum, etc. Major von Mastafel of the German forces sent for Alderman Schmidt. Upon the latter's arrival, the major declared that the hostages were to be held as sedition had just broken out. He asked Father Paris, Mr. Schmidt, and Major Conrads, first vice-rector of the university, who was being held as a hostage, to make proclamations to the inhabitants, exhorting them to be calm and menacing them with a fine of 20 million francs. The destruction of the city and the hanging of the hostages if they created disturbance. Surrounded by about 30 soldiers and a few officers, Major Manstefel, Father Paris, and Mr. Schmidt and Major Contres left in the direction of the station, and the alderman in French and the priest in Flemish made proclamations at the street corners. Near the statue of Ch.6, a Dr. Berghausen, a German surgeon in a highly excited condition, ran to meet the delegation. He shouted that a German soldier had just been killed by a shot fired from the house of Mr. David Fischbach. Addressing the soldiers, Dr. Berghausen said, "The blood of the entire population of Louvain is not worth a drop of the blood of the German soldier." Then one of the soldiers threw into the interior of the house of Mr. Fischbach one of the pastilles which the German soldiers carried, and immediately the house flared up. It contained paintings of a high value. The old coachman, Joseph van der Mosten, who had re-entered the house to try to save the life of his master, did not return. His body was found the next day amidst the ruins. The Germans made the usual claim that the civil population had fired upon them and that it was necessary to take these measures, i.e., burn the churches, the library, and other public monuments, burn and pillage houses, driving out and murdering the inhabitants, sacking the city in order to punish and to spread terror among the people, and General von Lutwitz had told me that it was reported that the son of the burgomaster had shot one of their generals, but the burgomaster of Louvain had no son, and no officer was shot at Louvain. The story of a general shot by the son of a burgomaster was the repetition of a tragedy that had occurred at Eschot on the 19th, where the 15-year-old son of the burgomaster had been killed by a firing squad, not because he had shot a general, but because an officer had been shot, probably by Belgian soldiers retreating through the town. The story of this tragedy is told by the boy's mother under oath before the Belgian Commission, and is so simple, so touching, so convincing in its verisimilitude that I attach a copy of it in extenso to this report. It seems to afford an altogether typical example of what went on all over the stricken land during those days of terror. In other places it was the daughter of the burgomaster who is said to have shot a general. The following facts may be noted. From the avowal of Prussian officers themselves, there was not one single victim among their men at the barracks of St. Martin, Louvain, where it was claimed that the first shot had been fired from a house situated in front of the Caserne. This would appear to be impossible had the civilians fired upon them point-blank from across the street. It was said that when certain houses near the barracks were burning, numerous explosions occurred, revealing the presence of cartridges, but these houses were drinking houses, much frequented by German soldiers. It was said that Spanish students shot from the schools in Rue de la Station, but Father Catala, rector of the school, affirms that the schools were empty. If it was necessary, for whatever reason, to do what was done, at Weiss, at Dinant, at Erschot, at Louvain, and in 100 other towns that were sacked, pillaged, and burned, where masses were shot down because civilians had fired on German troops, and if it was necessary to do this on a scale never before witnessed in history, one might not unreasonably assume that the firing of civilians was done on a scale, if not so thoroughly organized, at least somewhat in proportion to the rage of destruction that punished it, and hence it would seem to be a simple matter to produce at least convincing evidence that civilians had fired on the soldiers. But there is no testimony to that effect beyond that of the soldiers who merely assert it. Manat gestion. If there were no more firing on soldiers by civilians in Belgium than is proved by the German testimony, it was not enough to justify the burning of the smallest of the towns that was overtaken by that fate, and there is not a scintilla of evidence of organized bands of Francs-tireurs as was found in the War of 1870. Under the date of September 12, 1917, Minister Whitlock, in a report to the State Department of the United States, made the following summary. As one studies the evidence at hand, one is struck at the outset by the fact, so general that it must exclude the hypothesis of coincidence, and that is that these wholesale massacres followed immediately upon some check, some reverse, that the German army had sustained. The German army was checked by the guns of the forts to the east of Liège, and the horrors of Vis, Verviers, Bligny, Batis, Hervey, and 20 villages follow. When they entered Liège, they burned the houses along 2 streets and killed many persons, 5 or 6 Spaniards among them. Checked before Namur, they sacked Andin, Bouvines, and Champignon. And when they took Namur, they burned 150 houses. Compelled to give battle to the French army in the Belgian Ardennes, they ravaged the beautiful valley of the Simois. The complete destruction of the village of Rossignol and the extermination of its entire male population took place there, checked again by the French on the Meaux. The awful carnage of Dinant results. Held on the Sambre by the French, they burned 100 houses at Charleroi and enact the appalling tragedy of Tamines. At Mons, the English hold them, and after that, all over the Borinage, there is a system of destruction, pillage, and murder. The Belgian army drive them back from the Malines, and the Louvain is doomed. The Belgian army, falling back and fighting in retreat, took refuge in the forts of Antwerp, and the burning and sack of Horgand, Wavre, Autenay, Grimde, Neerlinter, Weert, and St. George, Schapen, and Aerschot follow. The Belgian troops inflicted serious losses on the Germans in the south of the province of Limburg, and the towns of Lummen, Bilsen, and Lanaken are partially destroyed. Antwerp held out for 2 months, and all about its outer line of fortifications there was blood and fire. Numerous villages were sacked and burned, and the whole town of Termonde was destroyed. During the battles of September, the village of Boortmeerberg, near Malines, occupied by the Germans, was retaken by the Belgians, and when the Germans entered it again they burned 40 houses. 3 times occupied by the Belgians and retaken by the Germans, Boortmeerberg was 3 times punished in the same way. That is to say, everywhere the German army met with a defeat, it took it out, as we say in America, on the civil population, and that is the explanation of the German atrocities in Belgium. A committee of the highest honor and responsibility was appointed by the British government to investigate the whole subject of atrocities in Belgium and northern France. Its chairman was the Right Honorable Viscount James Bryce, formerly British Ambassador to the United States. Its other members were the Right Honorable Sir Frederick Pollock, the Right Honorable Sir Edward Clark, Sir Alfred Hopkinson, Mr. H.A.L. Fisher, Vice-Chancellor of the University of Sheffield, Mr. Harold Cox, and Sir Kinhelm E. Digby. The report of the Commission bears upon its face the stamp of painstaking search for truth, substantiates every statement made by Minister Whitlock, and makes known many horrible instances of cruelty and barbarity. It makes the following deductions as having been proved beyond question. 1. That there were in many parts of Belgium deliberate and systematically organized massacres of the civil population, accompanied by many isolated murders and other outrages. 2. That in the conduct of the war generally innocent civilians, both men and women, were murdered in large numbers, women violated, and children murdered. 3. That looting, house burning, and the wanton destruction of property were ordered and countenanced by the officers of the German army. That elaborate provision had been made for the systematic incendiarism of the very outbreak of the war, and that the burnings and destruction were frequent where no military necessity could be alleged, being indeed part of a system of general terrorization. 4. That the rules and usages of war were frequently broken, particularly by the using of civilians, including women and children, as a shield for advancing forces exposed to fire, to a less degree by killing the wounded and prisoners in the frequent abuse of the Red Cross and the White Flag.